Good afternoon. Thank you for being here. My name is Eric Rothenbuehler. I'm Dean of the School of Communications. I appreciate everybody being here today. We're really honored. We have a special guest, one of our own alumni, Drew Jordan. Drew was a photography major, went on to work in video post-production, motion graphics. Now he's a member of the Pulitzer Prize winning visual investigations team at the New York Times. I'm not going to tell too much more of his story because I think that's part of his own presentation. But, he's working as part of that team, working on the cutting edge of new forms of reporting and new forms of visual storytelling. The field has changed tremendously and continues to change. We're lucky to have a connection, have a friend, an alum that's part of a group that's really working on the cutting edge. So it's a thrill to hear from him today, and we appreciate him being here. Welcome, Drew.
Hello, everyone. These lights are way brighter than my face is necessary for. So I'm Drew Jordan, as Eric told you. I started here in photography. Actually, I started in jazz performance at the music department in 2001, and I switched to photography. I guess my sophomore year. Went through the photo program and lean more towards commercial photography and commercial editing. When I was done, I did a lot of commercial work around St. Louis and Chicago. Did some digital tech work. I did a lot of photo manipulation work for ads. And after a few years, I just got kind of burnt out on it, being kind of a arrogant 22-year-old. I was like, I'm above this. I'm just helping sell stuff. So I took some time off and I went to New Zealand for a year. And when I was there, I worked at a local paper in Wellington, New Zealand. It was mostly like just local interest stuff, events and coffee shop news, stuff like that. Still really loved it. But I also was really interested in getting into video. One of my roommates at the time worked at Weta, which is the Peter Jackson production company. I just really got into like video production that he would bring home and animation and stuff that he was really interested in. So when I came back to the US that next year after my visa was up, I started looking at grad schools. And I looked at grad schools where I could pick specifically work in not just photojournalism, but like multimedia journalism. I mean, it's long enough ago that's when it was still called multimedia, not just video or whatever we call it now. So I applied to a few places. I ended up going to Syracuse University at Newhouse School. And luckily, since the classes that I took here were, the commercial classes were like pretty strong, I was able to portfolio out of a lot of my prerequisite for the master's program there for like some of the commercial and studio stuff. So that allowed me some time to do some animation classes, some After Effects stuff. So that's when I really started to get into like slowly pulling all this stuff together between photo and video, commercial storytelling, journalistic storytelling. As you can't tell how nervous I am now, what I figured out while I was in school for photojournalism is I love telling stories, but I'm not always the best at being in person, being there like in front of people. You know, if I was here talking with you and it was just you and I, and we were doing a story, it was following you, that would be one thing. But like once it comes into like really getting further into your life and into, like following you and embedding with you, especially like larger things like conflict, that I just figured out for myself that's really not what I was into, but I still love storytelling. So I figured out that my background in illustration and digital work and a lot of Photoshop work really mixed well with storytelling. And when I got out of grad school, I ended up moving to New York and I got an internship at a place called Mediastorm. And Mediastorm is one of the first companies. At the time, they did something called sound slides that was just it was as simple as photos, like a professional photographer, like Dario Delgado or somebody, that's like does a lot of like reportage work, doing photos with sound and audio. And at the time, that was like a big deal. This was 2006, 2007. So they were one of the first people to really do multimedia storytelling and do narrative journalistic stories. So I was their first design intern, and then I ended up working there for like 6 months after and did a lot of animation stuff with them. Fun fact with that is Brian, the owner of Mediastorm, I had not actually opened After Effects. The copy of After Effects that he wanted me to work with at that point. So I kind of just fibbed and was like, yeah, I totally can do it. I know exactly how to do all this stuff. I got to be fine. When I walked in the first day and was like, I have no idea what I'm doing at all. So there are some times where if you're really into something, you can literally fake it until you make it on an assignment or a job. After that, I worked. I stuck with it and did, a lot of varied things in media. Still did some portrait assignments for Getty and AOL and some other companies. I still did some digital web design, that kind of thing. Stuck with it until I started doing a lot more animation and graphics for more journalistic entities. So Getty, and I've done some things for National Geographic, and for documentary, I've done a lot of animation for documentaries. Worked on that for a long time until I just kind of got done with managing your own company, especially in Newark, can just get frustrating, and I really wanted to have an environment that felt more like a newsroom, more collaborative oriented than just working by myself, and then the next time it's a new client and I have to restart the whole process each time. So I started looking for work. I ended up working at NBC for about 7 months. I worked on a team there that they made this thing called, it's a Snapchat app that's like a Snapchat app for news. So I did design and production for that. Stay tuned, that's it, sorry. So they were it was the first, it was kind of the first news app, or news broadcast for tweens almost. It was very simplified, very engaging, but very simplified Snapchat news. So I didn't really want to stay with that, and I got a call from the New York Times. And at first I thought it was just about a freelance assignment or a short-term contract. And I went in and had an interview with them, and was, we were talking about all the things we could work on. And I got I got a call a week later that was hey, when do you want to come in for your second round of interviews? And I was like, what do you mean? And they're like, yeah, that was you had your first round last week. So I had no idea, and I was like, okay, cool, we'll go with it. And then I got the job, and here I am now. And I've been there for about 5 years. As I was starting there, they had just previously, just beforehand, started a team. We didn't have a name for it yet, that was doing something called open source reporting, or open source investigations, which essentially, we'll go through it, but essentially is just, it's open source journalism. So it's having the ability to, say you were online and you didn't have to have the same network and the same capacity as somebody, like CNN or New York Times or something. You can start with just your search and just your computer and really dig in and use public records, scrape the internet for Twitter images, there's all kinds of ways you can get this information to build investigations on something you're interested in, or a current news event. So we'll jump into this. It's now called Visual Investigations. If you guys want to keep my Twitter, you can. Feel free to reach out anytime. So what we do is essentially kind of build timelines around large events that have a lot of questions around them, or or there's maybe one photo or one video that is surfaced that we need to verify, we need to make sure is the event or the news is around that one specific video. There's also times where we like take a whole series of images or videos or assets and build like a large-scale timeline around an event too. So this is just a few examples of some of our work. Okay, so what is visual investigation? Just read it. Visual investigation, and this is kind of a conglomeration of our mission statement. Visual investigation is a new form of explanatory and accountability journalism at the Times. It combines traditional reporting with more advanced digital forensics, including collection and analysis of cell phone videos, satellite imagery, social media posts, public records, and more to reconstruct crime scenes, conflict zones, and important news events. So, what exactly does that mean? So we're analyzing spatial, temporal, and audiovisual evidence. So that means we're analyzing an area, we're analyzing things through map, we're analyzing the time around things, and we're analyzing the visuals captured by people in those events. Like I said before, a lot of the thing that we do is, whether we turn it into like a short piece, a very long piece, a very drawn out thing, kind of what we aim to do is build a definitive timeline of events, a timeline around some of these news events. So say, we'll get into it, but say something like the Capitol insurrection, where, in the first week or so, there was a lot of questions about like, what had happened, what parts of the building were breached, who was involved. So like as we go over time, you like build that out to really, I think we pride ourselves in creating like these definitive accounts through a lot of these assets, like building a definitive timeline of what has happened. And along the way, we answer a lot of questions. As far as our productions, they range from breaking news. So, say something. Right now, we've been doing a lot of our more recently is verification videos or short pieces around Ukraine. So whether it's analyzing a video to make sure it was, a verified video that actually happened on the day it did, it was actually like in Ukraine, it was actually in, say Kiev, or something, something as, I think another piece we had done recently is there were some, there were a bunch of bodies that had been left by Russia, and verifying through satellite data that, their narrative was that, that had happened after we left. So using satellite data to show like, okay, no, this is when you were here, this is afterwards, and we're disproving a lot of those kind of things. So, we range from breaking news to week-long smaller projects to something like the two projects I'm going to show you that are just like months-long, kind of much bigger projects that take a lot more sources, take a lot more investigation. One of the biggest things that's important about visual investigations, or open source journalism in general, is how accessible it is. It is something that, while there might be a mix of, it says it even in the statement, a mix of traditional reporting and journalism, I think at the heart there's still a lot of, the bulk of open source journalism still is open source. It still is you might be doing a little bit of reporting, but you're doing a reporting around, images that you had that day, or audio recordings that you had based around an event. If anything, it's corroborating or reinforcing the evidence you have in those other assets. And it's relatively inexpensive, relatively. There are some times where like you have subscriptions for like satellite companies, or some of the apps we use will have subscriptions that can be kind of pricey, but it is still open source in the sense that it's not like something that's money is a barrier, but it's not something that's can't be changed. It's not stuck behind like it's behind a paywall. It's not like there's no way to access it. Innovation, that's another big key. is I think there seems to be more and more ways, and that's kind of like visually, that's like part of my job since I do more of the motion design and graphics and animation around our work, is there seems to be like a lot more room for innovation, a lot more room for creative freedom in a I mean, I'd say in a field that like up until the past 15 years visually has just been kind of stifling. You know, like it's really hard to do creative work in journalism, and that's kind of why, you know, I feel like I lucked out in a certain way, but for me to have like kind of gotten into or stumbled into this field in some ways is very fortuitous, because I consider myself a creative storyteller, but I also like to, in that storytelling, convey information, convey facts, convey you know, important data. I think it's journalism, but also it's, you know, somewhat of a public service, and that's what I like about it. Another big thing, one of the biggest things, is transparency. This kind of work by nature allows for more transparency than, say, like, I had this source, I talked to him, trust me, I corroborated with this other source. You know what I mean? It's just a difference. It's more of like, it's less trust me and more of like, here, we're showing our work. We're showing our work in visuals, we're showing our work in writing, through these different mediums. Okay, so where do we look? When we say sources of open source, I'll kind of go through this pretty relatively quickly because we have some other stuff to get to, but you would be surprised how simple a lot of this stuff is. It is a lot of searching. It's a lot of like using search engines. It's a lot of looking through Twitter, Instagram, Telegram, Facebook, YouTube, Snapchat, all kinds of other places. Satellite image and data providers. Geospatial data, that's basically just a way of saying map data. Public records, you know, whether there's sometimes we get public records through FOIA, the Freedom of Information Act, or sometimes we get public records just because another, you know, grand jury or another case has freed them up. And there's a lot of stuff that's just by nature open to the public. Plane and ship tracking data. It's a big part of, like, sounds odd, but there's a lot in the movement of goods and people around the world that like really yields not just information around some of our stories, but actual like stories themselves. Corporate records and registries. So much stuff that's like open to the public in this, or you can access through paid companies. And then finally, like research groups and specialty organizations. For instance, on the one that I'd advertised, one of the projects that we had done that was part of the Pulitzer package was how we had figured out through a series of different kind of reporting points how Russia was involved in bombing targets in Syria, bombing hospitals specifically in Syria. So one of the big things in that was there is a network of people in Syria, of this organization in Syria, that not only do one organization tracks all of the like airstrikes in Syria, so they like track all of the airstrikes, and there's another one that does a lot of like plane spotting and radio recording and like interception. So that was like a specialty organization that like we found through search, and then like we quickly made a relationship with, and we're able to get the bulk of these recordings around these days that we had like suspected they were doing this, and there's a whole series of other information that align between different records and figuring out a series of codes that Russians were using when they were going to bomb specific targets, but that's a whole separate thing. It's a short way of saying like this is a really big part that's like kind of toes the line between traditional reporting and open source reporting. Because a lot of the times these people, even if they don't know it, are doing their own sort of open source work. Okay, so here is just a kind of a cast of a lot of the not just sources of open source, but some of the apps and places we search to. And this is provided through a company that's like, if anything, is more of an early founder of open source than we are, because a lot of our people have come from Bellingcat. They're an agency, I believe in Belgium, that is basically like pioneering this. We just do a lot more of the visual narrative presentation than they do. They do a lot more of the just fact finding. Cool. And this is kind of, some of this is doubling up, but tools and resources. So drone, satellite, cell phone, archive footage, SamDesk and snap maps. These are something that help us like pinpoint certain, like using metadata in some of the images or in the video, like UGC video, to show where a lot of the stuff happens, so you can put it on a map. So in some cases, it's really important to see like the spread of where these videos are happening. InVid Chrome extension is a particularly good one because that helps us. I'm not going to get into like how it works, but it helps us verify through a lot of reverse image search also that it's not a fake video, or if it's not a video that's like been it's from the time period it says it's from. Telegram search tools, a lot of these are kind of just tools associated with the sources. We do a lot. This is a particularly interesting one because when we talk about verifying videos, so or photos, you know, it's a when, where, and sometimes what. Sometimes you're trying to figure out what time of the day it was in the photo, which means you're actually needing to like figure out through some software how the sun or how the moon even, like shadows, are being tracked in that photo or in that video. So that's kind of a fun, super nerdy one. This is something most of the stuff I deal with, these bottom ones I deal with a lot more on the graphic design, like motion graphics production side. Do a lot of mapping. We use stuff as simple as like Google Earth Pro to plot out, you know, give ourselves, if you want, even like a football field or a playing field of a lot of these scenes where we can map it all out before we really jump into something. And Adobe Creative, there's tons more. If you want, I can show you. I can show you the link to this Bellingcat toolkit that gives you a lot of these sources from before. Cool. This is the Start Me page for all of our computers. So this is just, there's like 3 more pages after this of just tools that we use a lot of time. You know, something as simple as like how we work with metadata, just how we like scrape and download videos on sites that it's harder to do that with. Company data, you know, you can see here a lot of it is China and Africa. There's tons of ways to work with Twitter. We work with wire services a lot to fill in content. Yeah. Okay, so some things we do. We do lots of stuff. Obviously, there's some stuff that's hard to box into a category, but these are some of the things that we do quite regularly. Our biggest thing is we collect and analyze visuals. So we take everything we can, even if it's from a short, even if it's a short news cycle. It's something that we're trying to get as fast as we can. We try to like gather as much as we can around that event, around that thing. The only exception is, say, something where where the photo or the video is the news event itself. Then that's a whole different thing where it just becomes more about the verification of it, and we write or build around that. But for some event where there's not one sole photo or video we're looking at, this is typically where we start. So this is how TweetDeck would look while we're like looking through. This is, for instance, this is Ukraine. So it's just tons of keywords. It's just tons of keywords and Twitter lists. And it's not just Twitter, it's other entities, but this is a simple one to show too. It's just a way, there's a lot of monitoring and a lot of going through here, or going through these different lists with keywords and figuring out like what's pertinent to like what we're looking at. There's a lot of CCTV and a lot of CCTV that is a lot more accessible in the world than you would think, and is relatively easy to find. there's plenty of projects where this comes into play. I mean, there's one we did years ago where it was about a teenager that was stabbed to death in the Bronx, and the only thing we really had at first was the CCTV provided from the bodega at the mini mart where he, outside of where he was attacked. But then through talking with sources and talking with like family and friends, we were able to figure out like what his route was from where he was to that bodega. So we were able to like go and reach out to those different building owners, get CCTV from those places, and really construct this thing where we could see his whole path that night. So it's a pretty common way for us to tell stories too. Okay, I don't think there's no sound on this, but this is just one of the ways where we collect as much as we can around a singular event, where the event itself is not, it isn't a photo or a video, but it's like, in this piece, this medic in Gaza was shot, and Israel was saying it wasn't them, that it was, or it was an accident, which in term it was kind of up in the air, but through this sort of reconstruction, so what we did, see if we can go back. So through gathering all of these photos and videos of that day from people there, from finding some like online through Twitter, through other entities, we were able to basically reconstruct the few minutes around that, and then take all of those videos and make a timeline to where they all lined up based on the shots fired, so that you can take all of the audio in all of those videos and line them up so you have that one at the shot. And then from there, we're able to take these videos and lay them out into like a 3D space. So another thing they had done is we had a team that went there and did they had done drone footage, but to basically make a 3D field through photogrammetry, where they like recreate the whole field, and then we're able to apply from those photos, like put them into that 3D space to be able to like walk through that. So that's one way, like we collect everything, analyze it, and then figure out how to put it into something. Okay, verify visuals, huge part of what we do. So where, these are a few simple things. It can be to verify, it can be car plates, architecture, vegetation, landscape. In signage and stuff can be language. In videos, it can be somebody's accent. Tons of things. These are just a few simple ones. When you can do a reverse image search, that's usually if we're trying to like see if it was on that, if we suspect that it's not from that day, or it's not from that time period, you can do a reverse image search. Google works pretty well. There's lots of other places that go a little deeper on it, but you can come up and see an image that was like, oh no, shit, this is from 2015, not from 2022. Once again, the sun and satellite is another big part of it. And sometimes, if we're using satellite and it's our only way to, it's a big open, area, maybe in the middle of the desert or something, and say like Iran, on a base or something, and we're trying to figure out like, okay, when was part of this base built? We think it was then, but say there was like an abnormal amount of cloud coverage for the day that we were going, we can't really do anything about it, and there's not a Google Street View to like drive out there and like look around either. So sometimes it's harder to figure out. It's not always, you can try to analyze. Sometimes, when we're speaking mostly to what, and saying we can't analyze it, it's usually when one of our main source of analyzing is satellite, and just like say we think it's a drone base or something like that, but there's really no other way to like to confirm that's what it is by like having anything on the ground. It's really hard to tell. So, this is also sometimes where some of this like also relies on in-person reporting too. Cool, verification example. Okay, so just a quick verification example. We've been doing a lot of these short blog post videos of clips and stuff sent from, found either on Telegram or sent to us from people in Ukraine. And some of them are, a little more like suspect in what they are, when they are. And it's just very, very, very important to confirm that it's the right place, it's the right time before we put it into the world. It's like, look, this is what happens. That's why verification is such a huge part of what we do. And to be honest, like there's a certain part of it that's like almost a service for the newsroom because, say, an international desk editor has somebody sends them a clip. We haven't seen it yet. We haven't verified it yet. And they're like, hey, I don't really do this. Can you guys take a look at this before I then put it in my either my story or my blog post? So we get a lot of that too, especially on breaking news or really heavy news event or like really heavy traffic events. So I think this is something we found on, I believe it was Telegram. So you can read through it. The gist being that there was, this apartment building was struck. They're saying, you can even find clues in this in the post too that you like. It's either clues for you to like use to like confirm, like okay, that is there, or to use to like disprove also. So many apartment buildings with damage, balconies. There are no military facilities nearby. Nearby are hospitals, several schools, and kindergartens. So that's something you can like use when you're searching in your verification to make sure that's the case there. And then that was accompanied with this video. You might have seen this. Also, before I play this, I will say there is some stuff that I'm going to show, and I should have said this at the beginning of the presentation, that can be kind of intense, can be kind of violent, and I know there's some like pretty strong language in some of the lighter ones, so if that's something that like is off-putting or triggering to you, you may need to step out for a minute. Okay. Yeah, I'll spare you those that speak Russian or Ukrainian. So in this video, we are able to see this sign. And in this sign, we can see clear text. So we're able to translate that into Plumbing Center. And then we see the name of the company. So you can search that in Google. You can go into Google Street View. And this was from like a past time. But it also, you can see that this house and this apartment building, oops, wrong way, lines up here and here. So we've used this label to go in, and we could use this other one here too, to go in and confirm that, okay, that's where that was. And you can do the same thing like further into the video and some other videos. We see this building hit on the left. We can go into Google Street View around the same area and look. So there's a lot of this that's like, some of this is very quick and very like cut and dry. Some of it is just like, for one video or one clip can just take hours and hours and hours. And here you can see where this is that company across the street. Okay, and like this was the result from that piece. And altogether, I think this was like a few hours. So there's some of this stuff that like having a larger team doesn't necessarily mean it's different output than say like one of you like just were to do it yourself and put it out there. It just means it's a little faster. Just the resources of a lot of people means it's more about time. Here's another example. So say, I don't think this is on any particular story, but say you were needing to figure out like where this is, and generally like what county or what area, you can scour, say this is like a big open area, you can scour that general big open area for this general shape. So there's a lot of that we do. These I'm just going to go through kind of quickly. So once again, track ships and planes, like I said, it's very common. It's very common that we use a lot of this in our stories. Like this one is to show the, in Portland protest in 2020, this was to show the flight path of a aircraft that was like, I think it was ICE, like a government agency that was like basically recording data on protesters, like was flying around the area, but they weren't revealing it. This is from the movement of people in ICE detention that were being moved out of the country with no COVID protocol. This is from a story we did where we tried to figure out how Kim Jong-un was getting like $100,000 luxury Mercedes with trade embargoes. Satellite imagery and data. This is another thing we do a lot of. I mean, it's pretty simple and explanatory. We do a lot of basically before and after, same thing as I talked about with the Russian invasion. Okay, so this one on the left is an example of, I'll go back again, where we have, when I say geospatial data, it doesn't necessarily always mean just literally map for satellite maps, but like for instance, this one, this orange and red layer is a heat map. So it shows basically a satellite that does infrared that shows different heat signatures in an area. So we were tracking this fire and its spread, and we were able to see like where it had started at that time, and then like where it travels from there. This is from another one about North Korea and them exporting coal illegally with sanctions on, and just being able to see like the buildup of ships before a certain date and then after, like how much it increased, I think after, I forgot what the impetus of it was. Identifying weapons, that's another really big part. There's a lot of times where we're basically calling out governments or agencies that are using weapons that are either, it's usually to like identify like how much force they're using. It can also be to, there's some like recently in Ukraine where they were using cluster munitions that are illegal to use. Documents and large data sets. This is another thing that we deal with a lot of the time. And what I say when I mean that, it's not just like taking the documents, but it's also like, it's mostly how we take them and organize them and use them for our own needs in reporting in these like very large sets of data, and mostly like how we try to organize them for our own use. And conflict coverage, that's another big part of what we do. Okay, lastly is 3D construction. So this is something that like, I work, and you can see all the graphics on these other things. Like, it's all stuff I've made, but this is something that I do a lot more of, and involved in a lot more of in the production and like actual like creative direction side of too, is 3D reconstruction. So it's a lot of these, this is used to, we'll show in a second, but to give kind of a setting and a place and a layout for an event. This is to explain, I've showed you part of this, to like show you everything involved around this one single moment. This is, and this is what I'm going to go to next with Breonna Taylor, is to show you when we don't have anything really to start with visually. Like, with these, there's loads of footage, all kinds of phone and even professional photographers there that day that we could rely on. There was no visuals of the event that night itself, so we had to figure out a way to reconstruct it slowly through other means. So this is the first one we'll go over. I'll kind of go through these relatively quickly so we have time still. Okay, so I'm just going to show a short clip.
What happened in the final minutes of Breonna Taylor's life? A full telling of that story has been impeded because none of the 7 police officers who raided her apartment used body cams, violating police policy. But with the recent release of thousands of documents and images collected first bullet fired by Taylor's boyfriend, and the 32 bullets the police shot in return, through windows, walls and ceilings. Using interviews officers gave to investigators, we charted their movements as they carried out the raid. And we analysed hours of 911 calls, grand jury proceedings, and footage by the SWAT team that arrived after the shooting. Members of the grand jury have accused Kentucky's Attorney General, Daniel Cameron, of shielding the officers involved from homicide charges.
Our investigation found that Mattingly and Cosgrove were justified in their use of force.
Sergeant Mattingly may have been justified in returning fire when he's fired upon, but our new analysis paints a more complicated picture about how this raid was compromised from beginning to end. We'll outline the flawed intelligence and tactical mistakes of a hodgepodge team of officers, their failure to properly announce their presence at Taylor's, the chaos and excessive use of force that ensued, and we'll explore the damning analysis of an experienced SWAT commander who was called to the scene after the shooting.
We just got the feeling that night that something really bad happened.
The focus of the police investigation on March 13th is not Taylor's apartment, but properties 10 miles away in West Louisville,
Hands behind your back, Bob. Come out.
where dozens of SWAT and police officers arrest an ex-boyfriend of Taylor's and his associates, and seize evidence including drugs. These officers are wearing their body cameras, and they carry out the raid safely and without incident. What the SWAT team doesn't know is that at this time, a hastily assembled team of narcotics officers is about to raid Taylor's home across town. They suspect her ex-boyfriend keeps cash or drugs there, but their intel is poor. They don't know she has a new boyfriend, and they think she lives alone. When 7 officers begin the raid at 12:40 a.m., they notice the lights are off, except for the flicker of a TV in a bedroom.
The light on the bedroom, the TV. I remember seeing it lit up blue, or when we pulled up.
Suggesting they know where Taylor is. In less than 3 minutes, she would be fatally shot. Inside, Taylor had dozed off while watching a movie with her boyfriend, Kenneth Walker. Adjacent is the bedroom of Taylor's sister, but she's not home. A hallway from the bedrooms leads to a living area, and the apartment's entrance is in this breezeway. The only light is this lamp opposite her door, where now the police begin to stack. In this reconstruction, we hear the official testimonies given by the 2 officers nearest the door, Mattingly and Nobles, Cosgrove, who's providing cover, and Hoover and Hankinson beside them. And we'll hear from neighbours and Kenneth Walker, who was interviewed by police right after the shooting.
When we all got up in line, I knocked on the door, banged on it.
Just as Mattingly begins to knock, a man emerges from the apartment directly above. He doesn't live there, but is picking up his child after finishing work.
The door right there, that's why it's babysitter. So I can go pick up my little girl.
A squabble with Detective Brett Hankinson ensues, and already the team seems on edge.
And I remember Brett extending his gun saying, "Get back to your apartment, get back to your apartment." Brett was a little bit worked up. I remember looking at Brett saying, "Brett, relax. Brett, just relax, relax."
The man retreats inside. The police are supposed to be conducting a knock and announce raid, but that's not what Mattingly says happens at first.
We didn't announce the first couple because our intent was to give her plenty of time to come to the door.
Inside, Taylor wakes up.
So it's a loud bang at the door. She pops up out of sleep and scared her to death. Me too. Like, who is that?
Banged on the door, no response. Banged on it again, no response. At that point, we started announcing ourselves.
Whether the police announce themselves clearly enough is a critical issue in this story that we'll return to later on. Not knowing who's at the door this late, Walker grabs his licensed handgun.
The other knock at the door. She's like, who is it? Loud at the top of her lungs. No response. So I'm like, what the heck?
They rush to get dressed and walk toward the door.
Never even made it like mid-hallway. But as loud as we were screaming to say who it is, I know whoever would be on the other side of the door could hear us.
Outside, some of the police do hear Taylor.
I can hear somebody inside. I can tell you. I can hear her.
But after knocking and waiting for around 45 seconds, they decided they'd given her enough time to respond and rammed the door open.
The last time, I just said, let's just hit it, and that's when we did the, police search warrant.
We'll show here what the police and Walker described seeing next.
I hit it. After the third hit, it flew open. And that's when it hit the fan.
As we're coming to the door like comes off the hinges, like an explosion.
The officers now make a tactical mistake. Mattingly steps into the doorway and puts himself in what police describe as the fatal funnel, a position vulnerable to gunfire and hard to move from.
I could see down the hallway, there's a male and female, side by side, shoulder to shoulder. Almost like they were together.
The apartment is lit only by the breezeway light that's coming from behind Mattingly and the faint glare of the TV in Taylor's bedroom.
You can't see anybody though. It was dark, there was no lights.
Thinking it's an intruder, Walker aims low, shoots once, and hits Mattingly in the thigh.
I feel like I aimed down, because I wasn't, of course I don't need to kill anybody, so I just let off one shot.
Mattingly immediately returns fire.
I got 4 rounds off, and it was like boom, 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 boom.
Then all of a sudden there's a whole lot of shots.
Mattingly fires 2 more rounds when he falls and takes cover. Almost at the same time, Cosgrove moves in and fires, stepping on Mattingly in the process. He has now also put himself in the fatal funnel, and although he's shooting, he appears to have no idea what's happening.
I see blinding, vivid, white light and blackness at the same time. I don't hear any gunfire at all ever, and I did not have any pain sensation or any recollection that I'm firing.
He continues shooting blindly until he runs out of ammunition, a total of 16 rounds.
If you told me I didn't fire a gun, I'd be like, okay, I believe you.
In response to Walker's shot, Mattingly and Cosgrove together fire 4 shots into a chair, cupboards, and a stove in the kitchen. 2 bullets go into the ceiling and pass through the living room in the apartment above, where the man, his 2-year-old daughter, and babysitter waited. 3 more shots go into the living room wall to the right, and the officers fire 13 rounds down the hallway where Taylor and Walker stood. Taylor is shot 6 times on both sides of her body, in the abdomen and chest, her arm and leg, and twice in her foot. In all, these 2 officers fired 22 rounds in less than a minute. An FBI ballistics report found that both of them shot Taylor, and that one of the 16 rounds Cosgrove fired was the lethal bullet.
We both dropped to the ground, but I just heard her screaming.
Thinking they're under attack, some of the officers flee when they hear a pause in shooting.
There was a little bitty moment of no shots. I was like, here's the time to go, and then it all started up again.
We don't know the precise sequence of events, but Detective Hankinson runs to the front.
I can hear the firing as I'm making the corner. I can see the flashes, the muzzle flashes.
But the only ones shooting are police. Even though all the curtains are drawn, Hankinson blindly fires 5 bullets through the patio windows.
My only option was to return fire, and I did that to the muzzle flashes.
He moves and fires 5 more rounds through the bedroom window of Taylor's sister, who isn't home. 2 bullets fly over Walker and Taylor, but none hits them. The bullets that go into the living area pass over Taylor's sofa and kitchen table and smash her clock. 3 penetrate the wall and enter her neighbor's apartment. Those bullets also smash the kitchen table, hit a wall, and shatter the patio doors at the rear. A pregnant woman, her son, and partner were home. Hankinson has been charged with wantonly endangering their lives. In total, the police fire 32 bullets, penetrating almost every room in Taylor's apartment. They hit saucepans, cereal boxes, and smash into her shower. They puncture shoes, shatter cleaning equipment, and land in her sister's clothing. And 3 minutes after police came to search her home, a fatally wounded Taylor is lying on the ground.
I'm just panicking and telling somebody, I'm yelling at him, because she's right here breathing, and nobody's coming, and I'm just confused and scared. And I feel the same right now. That's it.
Right. So, pretty intense things. The reason I'm going to show you this first, compared to the one next is, this is an example we had, like I said before, no footage of the event itself compared to other events. So what we did have released through some grand jury processing, some stuff was like given to us, and the rest, you know, was a series of like us going there, doing our own photos and stuff. But crime scene photographs, tons and tons of crime scene photographs. Police investigator videos, video interviews, which is what you saw last, transcripts of their interviews, body cam and dash cam footage. This is of the SWAT team that came after. The witness accounts and aftermath videos, I'll show you in a second. It's mostly people in neighboring apartments, police statements, the autopsy report, grand jury audio recordings, 911 calls, ballistic reports, architecture plans and realtor videos and NYT photos, and then just general field reporting. The biggest thing, since we didn't have anything, we knew, you know, we wanted to be able to reconstruct from all of this evidence, somehow reconstruct the event itself to better explain what had happened. Because there was a lot of stuff that was like, you know, seemed really off that had happened that the officers were talking about in their interviews. And to be able to like really show how off and how, you know, in the wrong they were, it was the easiest thing was to like reconstruct somehow the whole scene. And how we did that was through one of our, like me a little bit, but one of our graphics people in the graphics department who, she's a former former architect. Her name is Anjali Singhvi. She's amazing, but she, between the crime scene photos and talking with the people on the property, looking at past realtor videos, looking at like advertisements for the apartments, going there in person, taking pictures, using stills from like the SWAT body cam, was able to like reconstruct this whole apartment in a way that allowed us to then lay in the points where, you know, you have the points where the bullets, you see the bullets enter into objects, into the walls, and then through the testimony from the officers, come back to like where those points were to create these trajectories in this space. And then from there, being able to take testimony to figure out timing and just kind of general layout or timeline of the event itself. So I'm just going to go through some of these things, but just some of the stuff in the video. So this is some of the SWAT and body cam footage I was talking about of the people, like the SWAT team that responded after the shooting. We did an in-person visit. So you can see here using like real estate videos and 3D layouts to then recreate the scene too. And you can see the layout that was provided here by them. So then from there, you know, you can see laying in those bullet holes and just making this whole model to then work inside of. And then the investigator interviews was a big part of it because at first we were going to figure out a way to make a VO over the top of this whole model section. But then it made a lot more sense to transcribe and like figure out how we could use their words in the model itself to like recreate it. It just became more engaging. It felt, we were really worried about it feeling like almost like a video game or being too like insensitive. I think in a way it can, the nature of this kind of like work around this topic can already kind of sit on that line already, and that just felt like a step too far to just VO it ourselves. There's a lot of this kind of testimony. Sorry, I'm just kind of trying to get through the next thing. You can see how we were like, from their testimony, able to like take the model and lay out their position for a lot of this. And here's what I was talking about with, further on in the piece, we have the testimony of neighbors to mostly show like proximity and like what they heard at the time. And it really like reestablishes the timing of events too. And this is just some example of some of the documents in the investigation that we were able to get. And then, you know, as much as like redoing like the parking lot and the arrangement of cars and stuff too. So this is ballistic reports here. And then from here, you know, this is an example of like laying out data, of making a spreadsheet to like track all of these shots, from who, where they were, notes on them, any images we have that are associated with them. This is just we'll skip through this. It's just a similar thing as before. CBC. Right. And then we worked with print to end up kind of calibrating it to work in a print format also in the spread. So I worked with them to get it ready for this. That's another thing that happens is I think there's a big difference between like how things work in stills and in print and how they work in video. Like a map in still can sit there. It can sit there and you can take everything in. Like you can take all of this in. If we tried to make this level of information in a video, it would be there animating for like, you know, a good 10 to 20 to 30 seconds. So, you know, I think in video too is like thinking about, in animation anyway, for this kind of work, is thinking about the hierarchy of information, what's essential, what we can add in details, and kind of the flow of how it all works. And that's a lot what happened with the model in the video too, is what had happened is we basically, you know, in a way it's the same way if you had like a set. If you had a set and you were a director and you were trying to do blocking, you know, same way you would do any other video or any other production, we were trying to figure out like, okay, how do I start from this shot and get into here to show this aspect and then come over to here? So like once we make these models, it's not just, okay, the model's done. We have to think about how we use it, how we like work through it in a similar way we would do, you know, a live, like a production in the real world too. Okay, so this is an example on the other end of the spectrum where we had thousands and thousands, or thousands. We had a few thousand images and photos, or sorry, images and videos to use to reconstruct this. So this became the opposite, where we took like, how do we take all of this content, all of this stuff, and figure out how to like form it into like a definitive timeline of events for insurrection. I mean, the biggest thing is, it was, you know, pretty crazy, and it took us a long time to really figure out, you know, if we're talking about collecting and analyzing, what to do with that collecting and analyzing. At first, you know, it was pretty overwhelming, and we figured out how to take all of these images that we're getting so that as we got more, it was in some sort of organization. So a big thing on projects like this where we have loads of videos is like, sometimes we even build our own databases with the tech team to put just this content into, and how we organize it, and how we like are able to like work with naming convention, time that it's in the cut. So a lot of the content that we got, you know, the overwhelming majority of the content that we got is from people involved in the insurrection itself. So that's like kind of what makes this piece crazy. It's almost like a documentary filmed by the people that you're like putting a lens up to, you know. There's also a lot of released from ProPublica, which is another, we do, you know, we like kind of in between public service journalism. They're mostly strictly public service journalism. And then there was a scrape. It wasn't like it wasn't a hack or anything, but it was like somebody scraped Parler's database shortly after this happened. So they were able to like get this, you know, giant trove of everybody that had like posted messages and videos and stuff to Parler, which is I think it's still up, but it was down for a while. It was basically like a very right leaning social media app. And then as we start to build everything out, you know, we're trying to figure out what we're trying to tell with it. And one of the central things was these breaches and when they happen and like what led up to those breaches and telling a story based around that. To do that and to figure out like certain characters, because it's, you know, thousands of people to figure out where we see somebody in this video and where they make it to the Capitol in this portion. You know, there's loads of these like mini storylines of people that we don't use in the piece, but there is some AI software. This one is called Video Indexer, but basically you can load all of these videos into the software and it keeps them in this database. But then what it does is also the same way, you know, your iPhone on photos like says like, oh, is that you? Is that Drew? Like, you know, with your kid, oh, that's your kid too. I'll make a, you know, a database of that and how many times you're in there. It's doing the same thing. So it's finding people's faces. And obviously this is very pixelated here, but, and like you can then click on it and show like in that database of videos where that person has showed up again. So that was really helpful in this process. We did some early stories with this kind of technology where we're able to like see one person and like kind of follow their through lines throughout the day. This was the case of Roseanne Boylan, who actually was trampled outside of the inauguration door. And then this is another early piece we did as we were kind of developing, you know, if we wanted to make it a much bigger timeline of a piece, we did these smaller pieces. This is Officer Sicknick, who was, as far as we can tell, was sprayed with bear spray, bear mace, and then had a reaction later on and passed away. And then another piece we did was on the Oath Keepers, and they're tracking them, and then they're planning en route into the Capitol also. So that, after months and months and months, led us to, you know, after I guess like 3 or 4 months, we're like, okay, we're starting to like, we want to like really get into building a much bigger, more comprehensive piece around the insurrection. So we started to like really try to construct a narrative and how we're going to like tell the most important things. I mean, it's the same with any sort of storytelling that you guys do. Is you're really having to kill some things off that you love. You're having to like figure out like, even in this kind of work, there's for everything, there's like, for every piece we do, there could be like a whole separate article, or like often we do it in a Twitter stream, one of our reporters, where they'll just like give these extra facts and extra things around it so that it's not, you're not using it in this, so it's very streamlined, but then you're also getting this kind of package of different things around this event too. So I'm just going to show this. Is it 2 minutes? So this is just like an intro thing to the project.
It was a zero threat. Right from the start, it was zero threat.
Even calling it insurrection, it wasn't. By and large, it was peaceful protest.
You didn't know the TV footage was a video from January the 6th? You would actually think it was a normal tourist visit.
A tourist visit? This was not. And the proof is in the footage. As part of a 6-month investigation, the New York Times has collected and forensically analyzed thousands of videos, most filmed by the rioters themselves. We obtained internal police radio traffic and went to court to unseal police body cam footage. Our reconstruction shows the Capitol riot for what it was: a violent assault encouraged by the president on a seat of democracy that he vowed to protect. We'll chart how police leaders failed to heed warnings of an impending attack, putting rank-and-file officers in danger. We'll track key instigators in the mob, taking advantage of weaknesses in the Capitol's defences to ignite a wave of violence that engulfed the building. We'll show for the first time the many simultaneous points of attack and the 8 breaches of what appeared to be an impenetrable institution of government. We'll show how the delay to secure Congress likely cost a rioter her life, and how for some, storming the Capitol was part of the plan all along.
In fact, tomorrow, I don't even like to say it because I'll be arrested. Well, let's not say it. We need to go, I'll say it. All right. We need to go in to the Capitol. Let's go!
Right, so that's kind of a trailer to the piece itself. And this is just some examples of mapping. One challenge that we had in this piece is like when we have so much footage and so much chaotic footage all of the time, it's just like constantly in your face. I feel like in other pieces where what happens is like a lot of our intrigue and our interest are in these short bursts, and then we fill it with like B-roll outside of that to transition. On this, we had the opposite problem where we just had constant intensity, even in like the storytelling and how we were like pacing through it. So like we had to rely on graphics and animation and like the 3D model to really create kind of a pause and more of a grounding. We were like, okay, let's step back. This is where we are now. Let's lay this out for you, give you a pause. And that's, you know, it's kind of why it's like relatively simple in nature. It creates kind of a calm beat before you then jump back into the piece again. And you'll see a little bit in a second. This is it's just another example of some of the graphic stuff.
They struggle to subdue rioters who respond with their own chemical spray. And within 30 minutes, the police already have casualties.
Wrongful capital entry! Wrongful capital entry!
This first wave of rioters battling police has paved the way across Capitol grounds for others to follow. And after Trump finishes speaking, thousands more now fill this space. Meanwhile, inside the Capitol, Nancy Pelosi and Mike Pence have begun certifying the 2020 presidential election results. Certification will happen on both sides of the building, in the House and the Senate. And this is what the rioters want to stop. An hour into the assault, the mob is battling a police line here, along the west face of the Capitol. But that violence is now going to spread to multiple points of attack, as West Side rioters stream around the Capitol and inside the crowd on the east. Here's what that crowd looks like on the east. They're aware of the siege happening on the west side, and some are emboldened by it. But up until now, they've been kept behind the barricades. Then, this group from the west storms around the building and pushes right through the barriers. The police here barely put up a fight. And it's now that protesters all along the east barricades surge forward. Officers are overwhelmed from several directions. And retreat to guard Capitol entrances. But these rioters believe they've been deputized by their president to stop a crime. And now they start trying to get into the building itself. The Capitol is now surrounded. Rioters haven't made it inside yet, but around the time that the mob on the east pushed forward, rioters on the west were making a pivotal move. This scaffolding was erected for the upcoming inauguration of Joe Biden. It covers a staircase that gives direct access to an upper level and dozens of doors and windows. 3 police lines guard that route. But at ground level, officers are so overwhelmed that just a few cover this crucial access point. Several Proud Boys see the weakness. Proud Boys start fighting the police, and with others in the mob, they push through the line. Over several minutes, it's a brutal fight on these steps. At one point, the rioters are held back. But they make a final push up the flight of stairs. At the top, they scuffle again with a small group of officers, who give in after barely a minute. The mob now has direct access to Capitol entrances.
I can't believe this is reality. We accomplished this shit.
And hundreds more protesters below surge forward.
Let's go! See the
It's utter mayhem, and it's about to get worse. The scene is being filmed from countless angles, allowing us to piece together, moment by moment, what comes next. Proud Boy Dominic Pizzola uses a police shield he stole to bash in a window.
Okay, I'm going to pause for a time. Hello? Hello? Okay. We'll go through these real quick. But you can see a lot of it is set up through this like internal layout. We're short on time, I'll kind of skip through it. So this is a lot of what I do. You've seen all of the graphics in there, stuff that I've made. A big thing that I do, 70% of my job for graphics for this type of team is mapping. So it's just some mapping examples. So before and after, we'll just do it real quick, beginning of it. That kind of work over and over. Okay, so that's what I do. What's next? Just go through this very quickly. Personally, I think LiDAR, light detection and light detection and ranging. So it's what like a Tesla or self-driving car uses. It basically shoots out lasers into the environment around it and creates like this map of the like from the light and creates like a surface. And what you can do with that is lay over imagery onto that through using photo and photogrammetry, so that you can create these whole like scenes, and like you can use it in combination with a drone to then like even map like a whole area. As far as like, that's what I think one of the bigger things, the more immediate things in our type of storytelling will be helpful. I think a thing that's going to be impeding is deepfake. It's getting more and more common. It's getting really hard to tell the difference between some of them. And I think that's going to be something that, like, not just our team, but journalists in general are going to have to keep watching out for. And then if you guys have time, you should check out the New York Times. And it's not just because I work there, but they have a really cool page on basically like everything tech related in the future of journalism and storytelling. So it's a really cool page to check out if you have time. Sorry. There we go. Okay, and this is our page. You should check it out here and on YouTube, or on our site and on YouTube. And then if you have questions, I'm willing to stay past 3:30 if you guys have anything. Sorry, I ran a little long. Yeah.
folks who are on Zoom or watching in the lobbies on streaming, those folks who have questions, please come over here and stand at this microphone.
Yeah, Drew, thank you. I'm kind of a news junkie, and I watch news all the time about what's been going on with January 6th. What I just saw right here is clearly better than anything I've seen so far, the compilation. And one of the things I think that is so unique is what you do with the 3D graph, or the moving graphics. It gives people who are like visual learners a different kind of perspective from just all the overwhelming video footage we see. And I think that's really unique and an important addition to how we gather news and look at the news.
Thank you. Yeah.
I guess that wasn't a question.
It's okay. No, I mean, I think it's something that, like, especially in those pieces, like I was saying, it's when you have these, like, bombardment of images and bombardment of videos, and you know, especially when it's something like this, it's like a, you know, it's a commonplace. Like, you think you know, oh, the Capitol, I know the layout, but you really, like, need to have that element to, like, orient you, to really set up, like, in space where all these things are happening. I think it just, like, it causes the viewer to, like, not have to worry or over-process one thing. It just takes one of the things away that they have to, like, try to remember, too. Sorry, go ahead.
I've got a page full, so I'll kind of go until you get tired, if that's all right with you.
I'll drink some water. No worries.
First one was, you mentioned that some of your information comes from foreign sources that, like, specifically keep track of, like, missile strikes in Syria, as you were saying. So do you guys struggle, or do you have it built into your team, like a system to translate all that kind of, like, foreign info that's coming into you?
Sure.
Gotcha.
A lot of that is we've built up networks. I mean, that is the advantage of, like, this kind of thing at the Times, too, is it really is that it's more of that merger of traditional reporting and traditional, like, embeds with this sort of visual work. Is that, like, we have reporters that either have connections there, or we have, like, dedicated fixers, even dedicated reporters or videographers or photographers there that, like, you know the language, know people, and in some instances, you know, like, even in China, there's, like, there's not anymore, but there, for a while, there was, like, some connection here and there. It just becomes, like, how much more precarious it is to get that. But I mean, part of it is that it is, like, the institution that is. So, you know, I would imagine if it was, you know, like I don't know, like a smaller outlet that doesn't have those deeply embedded contacts and roots there, it might be a little bit harder. But yeah, I mean, it's a lot of, like, network building. Gotcha. You know, similar to other journalism too.
Cool. Next one. Sure. So it seems like you guys churn out, like, a lot of stories. So is there any kind of, like, story quota you have to hit, or is it kind of, like, subjective on what's going on in the news and, like, generally, like, what's your timeline for flipping a story?
Gotcha. I think it depends. It depends on the story. It depends on the news cycle. Like something like Ukraine, I think it's, you know, we switched towards this gear more of, like, okay, individual, like, video verification and short clips and things we can, like, push out that, like, are interesting and we don't have to build a full story around, because we know, like, it's better to have, like, little pieces of information and little things that people want to take in versus, like, no, hold on, we have to, like, make this big piece for you and we don't have the resources to, like, do this also. So I think on really crunch times in news, we'll do this, like, shorter pieces. I think something like this, it almost becomes like a, you know, you work on separate projects where it's like I'll work on a handful of other things while building that in the background. But there's no, like, quota per se. There's no, like, pressure from the masthead or, like, newsroom to be like, you need to have this many out. In fact, we had a model, I mean, this isn't my specialty, so I can't, like, speak to it specifically, but we did have a model that was a lot more like, okay, this event happened, what are we doing on it as fast as we can? Do you know what I mean? And that, like, it was fine, but we found that, like, we garnered more interest and more, like, community engagement on YouTube and Twitter and other things by, like, really finding out, like, the answer to a more interesting question, or to building a more, you know, like this. We've thought about putting something out, like, 2 months in. We're like, we got to get something out. So instead we waited, and it created more of like a definitive timeline with all of these like interwoven things. Like, it's not like other places hadn't done that or hadn't made a timeline. It's just it like spoke to more of like, this is how this group went through the Capitol, or this is like the officers that responded at this point. It wasn't like trying to figure out how we interweave all of these things. I mean, that was the biggest amount of, the thing that took the longest time is like, how do we tell this as a story more than like just report on like this happened, then this happened, this happened. But like, how do we take the most interesting things, cut out the fat, and like interweave it into this like interesting, compelling narrative that has, a layout of place. It has characters in it that, whether you're rooting for or against, you're still like, they're still following them. So yeah, I mean, that's a long-winded way of saying we don't really have a set model. I think it's just, yeah, like what's the most either like comprehensive coverage of this, and how long does that take, and what's the most interesting question about this event we can answer.
Gotcha. Sweet, thank you.
Sure.
So with a lot of your graphics, do you have, it looked like you worked out of After Effects, did I get that right? Yeah, so do you have like your own pre-built fonts that you've designed, and like your own kind of like set animation things built up, or is it like a different kind of beast to tackle every time?
Yeah, no, I mean, that's something like we've built, I kind of built up as I've started there, and as this team started, is the fonts and that are all set. I mean, the New York Times has their own design, I don't know, I want to say design council or Jedi council. They're very like strict about like, you could do this in this font, like we can't use anything else outside of these things. Gotcha. Even in this, like, if I use this in one of our productions, while it is a Times font, they'd be like, I'd get a email that's like, why'd you use that?
Gotcha.
So they're kind of strict about their design book. But as far as like the production of stuff, yeah, I work in After Effects a lot, but what I'll do is like for repeated elements, especially like things that I've done a few times, like whether it's something as simple as like how I treat like a waveform in talking, or how I like treat narrative text coming up or something like that, or even something like the last before and after thing I showed you. That's like a template I built that like, so I can do it faster. So it's like, okay, I can line up these 2 satellite images that our specialist gave me, and I can line it up in these 2 comps, and then I know if I just put those in, it works. You know what I mean? Like I can keyframe and it works, and all I have to do is think about where the little icons and squares go, or the annotations go over the top of it. So there's a lot of things that like, just through repetition, because I'm constantly having to think about, time. And like, it's a newsroom still at the end of the day. While we do have projects that are like these 5 and 6 month projects, it doesn't mean that they aren't like, we aren't just like working as fast as we can, even in that long time period. So yeah, I think templating from myself is a must. And then we also like, I also build out templates, like Mogart templates. I don't know how in the weeds you want me to get, but like Mogart, like motion graphics, central graphics templates that then the editors and some of the reporters that know some editing software can then like build their own stuff. So like essentially taking the time to create tools that then that give me more time for not having to do like small tasks like that. Yeah.
Sweet. I will keep going until someone.
Anyone else?
All right. So your team, does it submit all your finished products to like an editor-in-chief kind of person, or like what's that kind of hierarchy look like?
Kind of. I mean, the masthead, the desk heads, if it's like a larger project, like a much bigger thing, they'll usually want to sign off on it, and that's becoming a little more and more common, just because I think they're, we've kind of garnered more and more and more attention, especially for the Times. So I think with that comes a little more like observation, or like, yeah, I mean, like signing off on pieces, like being more involved. I think, like 3, 4, 5 years ago, that wouldn't have been the case. It would have been something really big that they looked at. But now, I think most kind of medium-scale projects that take a month or 2 or more to make, they probably want to look in. Or if it's like something that's very, very touchy or controversial that we're like handling, like they almost always want to be involved too.
Yeah.
Yeah, there's a lot of layers of involvement. So like having worked in commercial stuff, that's one way it's like transitioned in a kind of a weird overlap, is there's like just as many art directors and, you know, client people, and then like the head of the board for this corporation then also have to see it. So like you have a similar like layover and like levels of approval for your work too.
Sweet. I think that was all I had. So sorry. Thank you.
Drew, I'm really fascinated with the Breonna Taylor piece. I can't even imagine what that took, because you had hundreds of sources or potential sources of information to put together what happened, may have happened. So did the Times promote that you were working on an investigative piece, and then how much time did it take before you all presented that and published that final piece?
Gotcha. As far as promotion stuff, our promotion stuff is almost, it's short of doing small projects that like lead up to a bigger one, there's usually no like pre-promotion of something. There's not like, oh, this is coming, or like we've got a certain thing coming out. It's usually like, I mean, it's usually like we put it out and then promote, and then like, you know, like I said, the reporters like promote just by adding extra layers of information. We'll put it through social media. That's another template thing that like is figuring out how to like pre-think about all of that graphics and visuals and how we format that into like social media teasers and stuff. So there's a certain amount, even for this kind of like, you know, I'd say like harder edge journalism, that still has its layers of promotion and like thinking about like how we're going to get people to see it.
Right, because I was wondering, you know, I would imagine you think about the timing and the relevance of the piece you're working on, and then, you know, sometimes, you know, everything's so quick these days. We get information quick, and then it's like, oh, why are they doing that?
Yeah.
You know, I mean, in order to hold people's interest, you know, 6 months later, you know, you publish a piece and maybe some people have lost interest. So I was just kind of wondering about your strategy on that.
Yeah, I mean, it's some things, it's like the event is large enough that, like the Capitol event was large enough that I think the only real like news peg we like put it out on is that it was like the 6-month anniversary of it, but it's not like it was something that's like, you know, it's not like there was a Times headline that was like 6-month anniversary, you know what I mean? It was just, it happened to be what it was. With something like Breonna Taylor, I can't remember. There was a news peg. I don't remember if it was like there was it was part of an upcoming trial, or there's usually something that we're like, if it's been a longer period of time, something that we're like pairing it with or attaching it to in the news cycle.
Yeah. Thanks, Drew.
Sure.
Hello. First off, I want to thank you for doing the work that you've done, because that's so important in this quest for the truth. I want to ask, it seems like, because you mentioned deep fakes, you have a lot of these data sets, a lot of this information. What kind of ability and maybe what kind of necessity is there to have sort of the footnotes, if you will, public facing, so that would-be skeptics can, you know, you can point to this, you know, a regular citizen, even though I'm a journalist in my current life as well, I can point to that and go, look, you know, it's all in there. There's the endnote. There's the footnotes. You can, you know, you can go down the rabbit hole like they have, or at least know that they put the information out there, especially given the advance of technology. What, like I say, what can you do to put that out there, and how important is that? And will that change going forward?
Sure. I mean, I think transparency in this is a big part of it. It's like it's really important to us. It's really important just open source in general. I think something that we do on some of the projects is we'll offer some of the information or data in a more complete package through Twitter or or at times, like after we've done the piece, offer it to other reporters. It's definitely out there. I think one thing that we do, because it's in this kind of video capacity most of the time, and it's not something like ProPublica, where ProPublica does that a lot, where they're like, here's the data, here's the whole database, go for it, take it, do what you want with it. I think it's just more of a, I guess a R&D, like it's more of like, how do we facilitate that, like at the times. But there are some pieces where that's like, we will share it, or it's like through Twitter. But I think one thing that we try to make sure we do is show the work in the pieces. And I think some of these are just clips of some of the pieces, but some of the stuff we're doing in these, where it's focusing more on like the data and more on the information, it really breaks it down more than like some of the graphics example I showed you, where it really like explains how we did it, where we found it, like how we've been working with it. So I think that sort of like show and prove versus like just trust us, I think is kind of one thing we try to embody with a lot of our work too.
All right, well, we've come to the end of our time. So cool. Drew, thank you again. Thank you. And if any of you were too shy to step to the microphone, maybe you can step to the front of the room and chat with Drew now.
Answer more questions, whatever you all want.
Thank you very much.
Sure, of course. Thanks for having me. I appreciate it. It's good to be back.